absolute heroes. So
it's 6 o'clock.
Well, there we go. Welcome. We have even more people that have signed on. Wonderful. Well, I guess we can begin. Hello, I'm Lydia Melamed Johnson, and along with my co-director, LeeAna Wolfman, we are excited to welcome you to October Art Week's first virtual presentation. This year has brought distinct and unique challenges and hardship to everyday life. The social distance we must all adhere to has closed doors to institutions and organizations around the world, and these circumstances have changed the way the art world interacts and transacts. This evening, we'll be discussing the current state of the art world and how those galleries, auction houses, and museums have evolved during this unprecedented period. Just a note that there will be a Q&A session at the end of the panel, and if you have a question and you would like to ask any of our panelists, please use the raise hand feature at the bottom of the video and then type in your question. All the questions submitted will be asked during the Q&A section at the end of the panel. I am now very pleased to introduce our panelists for the evening. First is Adam Harris Levine, Assistant Curator of European Art at the Art Gallery of Toronto in Canada. Next is Jonquil O'Reilly, Specialist and Head of Sale in the Old Masters Department at Christie's, New York. And last, but certainly not least, Dr. Robert Simon, art historian and art dealer at his gallery, Robert Simon Fine Art in Manhattan in New York. A big thank you to our panelists for joining us this evening, and let's begin. LeeAna, send it to you.
This is so special. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for everyone who's tuning in. Usually we launch October Art Week with a reception in all of the galleries, and obviously that is not possible this year, so we are thrilled to do something festive and really special with some wonderful professionals in our industry. So that being said, as Lydia said, this has not been an easy time for anybody by any means, and that definitely is the same for the art market. But we would like to start on a bit more of a positive note, which is trying to find the silver lining in all of this, which is an exercise we have to do every day. But I would like to kick it off by presenting to the panelists the question of what opportunities has COVID-19 actually presented in terms of a more digital world, a new digital reality, as we've called this panel, and has the virtual communication created a new project that maybe you couldn't have done before, or a new connection with other people in your institution or in the art world itself. Anybody want to kick it off?
Well, I'll speak about it from my part of the commercial world. Certainly, our basic shutdown for a while made us rethink how we might present things, since people in-person viewing was not going to happen certainly over the summer, and is not really happening now except by appointment. So reaching out in terms of producing some videos of informational ones, and also in terms of doing digital catalogs, beginning really with our first one, which was of relatively lesser priced works. That is to say, they range from $3,000 to $50,000, with the idea that since we might be sending these off on approval, or in order to, for viewers to see them in their own, to shop at home, as it were, to see whether that might be a more palatable way of sort of jump-starting our business again. And as well, we also decided to include prices in the catalog so that it would be very clear, make it a little more normal in terms of related to how people shop generally. So that was kind of what started it. I think there has always been a resistance, especially in the old master field, because condition is so important, and personal observation of things has always been considered the critical thing to first order of business. But I kind of thought back to the way things were maybe 20 years ago, when the idea of online dating began, and you say you would never ever kind of start talking to someone that you hadn't really met in person. And yet, although I haven't taken part of online dating, it's a very big, obviously part of the way people communicate today and meet people. And it's the same way, not that we're becoming the Tinder of the art world, but we are trying to make it easier because so much can be communicated digitally through visuals, through condition reports, through photography showing things scaled on a wall so that people have the idea what it might be look like in their own home. And this goes for museums as well as for private collectors.
Absolutely. Oh, I'm sorry. Are you going to go ahead, Jonquil?
No, you go ahead. We can tune out Twinkle Twinkle Little Star in the background for a moment longer.
Okay. I ditto 100%. And I've really enjoyed the videos that you've produced recently, Robert, on your fabulous winter halter, because I think, and I think they're a really good example of what can be done with video, specifically because, when you're talking about, say, in that case, an example of a sort of complicated and riveting story of provenance, it really does, video lends itself to storytelling, digital storytelling especially, in a way that I think is really essential and will reach many more people than text only. Right before the pandemic arrived on our shores, we acquired a picture, a late 18th century portrait of a woman of color about which we knew honestly fairly little, and we decided that we wanted to be as candid and transparent about our research process as possible as soon as we started working from home, and we started working with experts far outside of the art history realm, so botanists and historians of slavery and anthropologists, and we really just wanted to kind of turn our research process out for the public eye, and I think that in the same way, we let people sort of hear our conversations. We decided to sort of present it as a podcast and just share our audio conversations with our colleagues that are experts in fields that are totally different. And I think that we probably would never have had the impetus to do this if we weren't working from home.
Yeah, I think, well, as somebody who was once called the Kim Kardashian of art history, which I'm pretty sure was meant as a diss, I think we should fully embrace Robert Simon Fine Art being the Tinder of art history. I thought that we're going to claim that one. I found. And it's something that Adam actually brought up yesterday when we chatted briefly, was about how it's made things so much more democratic. As as Robert says about condition, we have these ideas of what our clients want and need, and sometimes I think it's possibly just what we've been used to. And we talk a lot about the old guard and the old way of doing things, and but I think what we've seen more and more, as much as we've been clinging to those exhibitions, which of course is still very important, we do see so many people bidding on things that they've never seen in real life, at Christie's, for example. And equally, when online bidding became more of a thing, but people prefer to bid on the phone. Well, no, we saw that people would bid online, and at first we thought, oh, well, it's only for lower value things. But no, now we see people bidding online on things that they've never seen in real life, and bidding up to really high amounts. And I think that's one of the big changes we've seen. But one of the ways that we've had to pivot very quickly is how we sort of produce things digitally and put things out. And sometimes with a larger company, it's a bit more of a juggernaut, and that can be much more difficult. But we've been surprisingly nimble, I think, in producing new sort of online catalogue pages that are much more interactive. So things that you've been seeing in shops and things like that, and with fashion brands or with large companies for a long time, but somehow the auction houses hadn't so much applied that to art. And similarly, museums hadn't been applying it in the same way. And So I think it's been really interesting to see how we've and museums too have started to make those pages much more interactive, much more easy to navigate, and also lead you on to different things. So you might be looking at your traditional catalogue, entry, but you might also be able to click on something that will be a video about the lot, and you might be able to then click on something that will give you an in-depth condition report and all of that kind of thing. And just help yourself to something from the fridge. He's valiantly just put the baby down, so he should be allowed a bit. But I think it's those are things that we've definitely been trying to do, is invite people to the website, and once they get there, try to keep them there.
Just to continue that just a bit, I think the one goal that we all have is engagement, and whether it's with the museum, auction house, and I think it's something we've kind of taken for granted, and it's given us an opportunity really to think of new ways of doing it. And I often think back in the days when we get on an airplane and I'd sit down next to someone, and this fellow might be a middle manager or whatever, traveling someplace, and he'd ask me what I do, and I said, well, this is what I do, and it involves research, it involves finding things, it involves speaking to people, it involves all this historical and social, these connections, and then he'd say, like, you get paid for this? And I think, yes, I do. We're in a very interesting field, and it keeps us intellectually active, and I hope commercially, successful in one way or another, be personally successful. But it's not like selling shoes, and being able to communicate, although maybe Jonquil would disagree in some of the ways that we're trying to promote selling it, but it's a unique field, and trying to share the enthusiasm that we all have for it, what makes it just different and distinctive from other aspects of the art market, other aspects of just any kind of commercial activity. That's I think our goal, one way or the other.
Yeah, and that's something that I'm interested in, is we've had to make so many changes so quickly, and we've had to invest money, and we've had to change our norms, the way we work with each other, make videos, create timed exhibitions. How do we feel this is going to affect things after this has all blown over, hopefully sooner rather than later? Do you feel like you're going to take the time and prioritize making videos, creating more interactive experiences, or do you think things will go back to how they used to be for the most part?
Well, for my part, this is a permanent change. I mean, it's an evolution, I would put it that way, and although this obviously the pandemic's nothing that anyone wanted, it's kind of it's interesting to see how many different things, from telemedicine to what we're doing in trying to present pictures, how many things seem to be better, or even just having meetings or having the talk that we're having tonight, because here's Adam up in Toronto, and Jonquil's in I don't know where you are, Jonquil, in the city.
Brooklyn.
Brooklyn. Yeah, I mean, we're all in different places, and to organize it comfortably, where we can all really have I think it's a terrific evolution that we really want to keep. So certainly the social aspects of something we all crave, and I think that will come back in different form, perhaps, but still it will be all the more appreciated when it does. But in between, having these opportunities to communicate the things that can be communicated really well digitally is a real plus.
If I can connect a few different dots, I think just to go back to LeeAna's earlier question about reaching new audiences, I don't want to lose sight of the activist movement that has also been born in this time. And I have been really heartened by movements within museum curators and colleagues sort of throughout the Old Masters world to address questions of race and to kind of continue conversations that I think were nascent for a long time, thinking about Black subjects and paintings by the old masters, and sort of asking questions around racial equity and thinking about the discipline. One, and two, I think that I've been able to have conversations with colleagues all around the globe on specifically these subjects with a speed and efficiency over Zoom that I never would have been able to have from my office. And I just think that the confluence of those two things has actually made for really rich and fertile progress in our field, which has a reputation of being slow to change, and maybe in the past has been accused of disinterest in the subject.
Just going off of that, I wanted to ask kind of all three of you, what new audiences have been engaged through this time? Because making it kind of more democratic, are you seeing new kind of entries into this world? Are you seeing new interest from new demographics and new I mean, I hate to keep using the word engagement, but I think it is what is happening, and especially with the movements that are happening, whether those audiences are actually coming in or if it's really just the beginning.
I think for our part, I think at the moment it's just the beginning in the old master world, at least. Christie's have certainly made some big promises, but they changes that they're making in the company, but they also doubled down on that in the last week, talking about, it's, big words aren't enough, and so they talked about what they're actively doing to change things within the company. Within Old Masters, though, I think we've certainly been trying to reach a younger audience for a very long time. And I think, we see this, we talk about it every season, and there are panel discussions.
We've certainly had this discussion before.
We have, and I think that what we're seeing now is, even, as Adam was saying, being able to have events like this over Zoom, and them being recorded. When I've done events in the past, sometimes you would have to, you've got to make sure that you've got budget, you've got to make sure that you can accommodate all the right people at the right time, and you have to put on a cocktail, but you find that you end up inviting all of the same clients, the people who are very well looked after in the first place, to all of these fantastic events, and it's lovely. But it means that you can't approach new people, because those new people aren't invited and they don't know it's happening, and we don't know who they are, so we don't know who to invite. And you can publicize, but you have to be already interested in particular channels and already following things. So doing things like this, that you can sign into from the comfort of your own home, which is great, but also recording them is so important, because you're assuming that people are able to zip out of work at 5 and get wherever they need to go across town, assuming they live in the city that you're doing it in. And realistically, these sorts of events happen in major cities. And by doing things this way, you can reach a much broader audience, because you're recording it and people can watch it whenever they like, according to their work schedule as well. But also according to where they live. And I think that's important of getting the word out there more and allowing people to share things more broadly, rather than coming to these things in person.
Really speaking to the accessibility of this time. And
I think the words that I never thought I would use in the same sentence are Uffizi's TikTok. The Uffizi established a TikTok during the pandemic, and it's been tremendously successful. And I think, in what world would we have ever thought that they would be, one of the great leaders in social media, and that they would be, and that there would be an appetite amongst the Gen Z crowd to learn in that way like that. I'm still reeling of all of the odd surprises of 2020. Somehow the Uffizi's TikTok really threw me, and it's exceptional.
Going off the accessibility to our attendees who are watching right now, I know some of you joined us a little bit after the beginning. If you have a question for our panelists, use the raise hand feature at the bottom of your screen and then type in your question, and we'll be answering questions at the end of the panel for about 15-20 minutes. Sorry to interrupt, guys. I just want to make sure we get some questions at the end. We have 2 so far.
I mean, I don't have the new demographic that I've found is just some people that are younger than I am. In terms of the, and we've been able to reach new collectors who are beginning collectors who are interested in, and I think the accessibility issue has been one that's prevented them. You know, it's communicating first the fact that many of the works that we are involved with are not crazily expensive. That they're accessible to, I mean, you know, when you're a college student, it's hard to buy anything. But I mean, as you move along and are gainfully employed, and as you go through life and you attend museums and you look at the things on the wall and you think, oh God, that's wonderful stuff. And maybe one day I could acquire something in the field, and the reality is there because it really is accessible. So that's what I found by having a little broader outreach. And certainly, I'm sure this is I mean, one of the things that always struck me as odd is that when you go to a museum, the galleries for the older art, I mean, just to distinguish between contemporary art, say everything before the year 2000. But, you know, these are filled. This is what people are most attracted to, I think it's fair to say. And often they're very confused by contemporary art, as sometimes I am, but nonetheless, we have, there's a whole wealth of activity, of interest out there, but the collecting world, as popularly envisioned, tends to be focused, and all the reporting tend to be on contemporary things. And making that, understanding that these are things that one can live with, one can own, that they are even more accessible than many of these other things, is something that I think we're now able to do a little more. And the key to it really is education, which is why the things that Jonquil was talking about, and Adam, and what we're all trying to do is sort of, you know, plant the seeds by giving more information about the things that we care about.
Well said. I think now, to turn the tables a bit, we're going to discuss the negative impacts of COVID-19, because something that has been a bit distressing to me is reading some of this news that Robert was just talking about that is very focused on the contemporary market and how things are still selling, and talking about only a very specific demographic of gallerists tends to be all I really read about in the paper, or art fairs. And there is a bit of a crisis that we're going through in certain markets. And so we just wanted to speak a little bit candidly about some hardships that we have faced professionally in this time, and think about them not as diametrically opposed to, but in terms of the positives that that COVID has also afforded us in this time. That's not really an optimistic kind of prompt, but does anyone have an experience that they'd like to
I can
about?
probably speak to that pretty candidly. Working in an auction house means that you have hundreds of colleagues, and when it comes to controlling who is allowed in and out of the building, and taking that as seriously as we have needed to, particularly when you work in a building like the Rockefeller Center, where many of the offices have no windows because they're in the central part of the buildings, or they're sort of windows that don't open because they're galleries, that kind of thing. It means that we've been allowed only a very, very small portion of people in the building at any one time, and we've it's been very clear of who's allowed in the building and who's not. So you're split into zones, and it's depending on where in your sales cycle you are. So trying to get used to, for some departments, it's easier than for others. And for old masters, we had to say right from the beginning that we need to be in the building a bit more, because our research can't be done online for the most part. It has to be done in books. And so being able to just access our own library in the office, which is fantastic, but has to be very wide ranging. So, you have the key monographs, but you don't have every exhibition catalogue. You certainly don't have sort of every sale catalogue going back to the 1700s, unless they're Christie's ones, in which case we've got those. But all of the things that we have just been so used to nipping off to the Frick library, or nipping off to the Watson Library at the Met to look things up, and sort of realizing how much we rely on it and how much we take that research for granted, that's been very difficult. And so trying to work out how you navigate research, how you navigate the expectations of your clients who are consigning as well, and so that you can make it clear to them that you will do the absolute best job with their paintings, and everyone's very understanding. But then as things start to open up more in some countries rather than others, so when things became much more open in Europe, for example, having to explain to European clients, well, actually, here I'm still not allowed in the building until Tuesday, and I have to wait until this colleague is there, and then I can get that thing for you, and thank you for your patience all the time. So that's been a huge challenge. However, it has in Old Masters at Christie's, we're a pretty tight-knit team anyway. It's not a huge number of us, but we've learned to work with each other in a way that we hadn't ever before. And we'd always worked well, but this has been a new level. And just taking things off each other's plates, which it's been really lovely to see how everybody has jumped in to help everyone else. But that's certainly been a major challenge, not to mention shipping, which obviously has been very difficult. But then we've done other things, like we've talked about, to make it more accessible again. So there's, it's even the negatives have some positive.
I will say, I feel the whole issue of virtual couriers for art objects has been a really fascinating question that I think we're watching unfold, because in many ways it's sending a courier is one of the greatest expense. It's an expense that makes loaning artworks difficult. It does increase the carbon footprint of lending art, and I think many museums feel a pressure to reduce their carbon footprint. That being said, the idea of doing a conservation report after you take a multi-million-dollar artwork off the wall via FaceTime, I think causes a lot of concern. I don't know where the future for this lies. It is increasingly a practice at many museums in this moment, and I'll be really curious to see if it survives beyond COVID. It feels really complicated. I don't really have anything more nuanced or intelligent to say, other than that it had never occurred to me as an option, and now it's become a very widespread practice very briefly. Is it something, Jonquil, are you, do you find clients are asking for FaceTime tours of paintings?
Oh boy, yeah, and that's something, and in fact, we've, once we saw that people were asking for them in the previous few sales that had been happening, so in Asia Week, for example, and in Contemporary, it's something that we've been proactively offering. So it's something that I find myself emailing my clients as I would normally, saying, don't forget sales next week, and can I, whereas at one point I would have said to you, when are you coming in? Looking forward to seeing you. And for those who are in Europe, I would say, is there anything you'd like me to look at for you on your behalf? Now being able to say, do you want to go through the exhibition together? In the past, I've even stood in front of paintings and talked on the phone, and that's something that people like to do. But it had never occurred to me to FaceTime, and but we've got so used to doing it with our colleagues, even where we, we have very strict processes when paintings come in, and we look at every painting, no matter what the value, whether it's 10 million or it's $3,000. We look at them together as an entire department. But now, obviously, we're not allowed to do that. So we have two of us there, and one of us is sort of looking very carefully, and the other is there with the phone, trying not to make everyone else really seasick. And the rest of the department are all at home, and we're doing it on a screen. And as you say, it doesn't necessarily make for it's not the best situation, and it's difficult to assess a painting from a video, but it's not as bad as we thought it would be, and we are managing. So
I think the biggest fear for me about cutting, in some ways I will roll with the punches if we're all asked to, reduce our travel permanently going forward. But, not every museum has their entire collection well cataloged online. And there is nothing greater than discovering a work of art that you have not seen in many years, and that, or never seen before in the flesh, and spending time with it. And I don't know if the digital age will ever come up with a stopgap for that.
Well, Robert, I'm going to have to ask, have you had any experiences as of late, or would you just kind of describe how your daily life has changed as a result of what it was like to go into a gallery every day and be amongst these objects and having to pivot to have a different kind of relationship with them?
Well, I mean, since research is so much a critical part of it, luckily, as you can see, a little portion of my library, my indulgence over the years, because whenever I saw the picture, I'd buy books. Still the case. It's kind of paid off and given me a bit of independence. Between that and some online resources, I'm able to do a lot of research. So and I don't have the commuting time back and forth to the city. Of course, I miss the libraries immensely, but a lot I've been able to do in-house, and also been able to probe some new areas of things that I have been working on. I've also been able to acquire some paintings in this time because, like everyone else, I'm spending a lot more time on the computer, and just as things have become more understandable, and we're able to sell things a little better by having better access and more information to it, I've been able to buy things as well, and in sometimes very distant places. So it's been kind of interesting. I mean, to a certain extent, some of it has been with the expectation that these would be things that I would present in a more normal, traditional way in the future. But it may not be that. It may be part of this new way of doing business and of communicating with our clients. So it's kind of interesting. I think it's those that just will sit and complain about it are just not going to be doing are not going to be enjoying life in any case. Adapting, finding the good parts of it is hard. There's no question about it. Economically, it hasn't been disastrous for our business, but it's been very, very difficult. I mean, having a gallery, which is essentially a very expensive office at this point, and while some landlords have been quite accommodating, mine has not been, and so the costs, the expenses have stayed the same. Maybe even have grown, and yet we've had very little coming in. But we're investing our time in the future. In terms of what my daily life is like, I sit down at about 9:30 in the morning in front of the computer. I usually don't leave it till 5. It's just like our friends who are teaching. It's kind of takes twice as long to do what you did before. Somehow, and of course, because we're all communicating this way, there are more distractions, there are more emails, there are more things that will just appear, even lectures or Zooms like this. And so we're just not as efficient. I think maybe we'll grow to be a little more efficient in the future, but we're still learning how to cope with this new reality.
Absolutely. I guess, did anybody have anything else they wanted to touch on? Or I know deaccessioning from museums has been a bit of a hot topic in the news these days too. Adam, I don't know if you want to talk about that. And then of course that also can branch out to our other panelists as well. We can also talk about something different. That's the beauty of this.
I try to deaccession as much as possible.
I just want to, sorry to kind of hark back to what you were just saying. And I wondered how, in terms of kind of the deaccessioning actually kind of reminded me of this and of the people that might be standing in front of those pictures. You know, Jonquil, you've touched on this a little bit of how you can show people around on your phone, and that you can have some visitors to the building and some not. And Robert, I know earlier you mentioned that you were coming back from the city. I wondered how that dynamic has changed in even showing a picture. You know, it used to be, you know, Robert, when I was in the gallery and showing, it's a really intimate conversation. You're very close to the picture. You know, you're discussing things, and these conversations can sometimes last for a very long time, all things that we're not supposed to do anymore. And so, you know, and I think I went to the Met today and I was with a friend and we wanted to kind of get close to pictures and look at them. But if anybody kind of came close to us, we stepped away. And so I wondered how that interaction between people together in front of art and also with the art has changed in your experience.
Well, I would say that I've had a couple of clients come in and I've spoken with them, and we just speak through masks, and it's not really that different. But I think the one thing that the topic we're talking about is that, and I think all of us have the same experience, that we are in our different roles educators. And when we talk in front of a picture, whether it's with a client at Christie's or in the museum, or whether specifically with an individual or with through a label or through what we do in the same, you know, it's something that we're trying to communicate what's special about the picture, or if it's a painting that we're talking about, and being able to broadcast it in the sense that throwing seeds and just sort of getting a big audience through digital media is kind of is a very good thing. It's a way that we can you know, discuss things publicly, and so certainly the one-on-one contact I think we all enjoy, and certainly as an art dealer, having a client, a collector in the gallery or a curator, it creates a very special situation, one-on-one and with questions back and forth. But you know, if it's not meant to be for a while anyway, and maybe less so generally in the future, so be it. But we'll make up for it by just having a broader audience and being able to get the message out in a more efficient way.
I think that's right, and having that, you're going back to the discussion of things being a bit more democratic. It means that in sort of being forced to engage in different ways, we've come up with new ideas. And I think that, you know, Instagram obviously has been used a lot, TikTok too. I haven't branched out to TikTok yet. Maybe I should. I don't know if I'm too old. But I think that that kind of thing has helped. You know, obviously people do have burnout. They're in front of their computers a lot, but they've also been engaging with a lot of things. So one of the things that I did was via Instagram, get in touch with a digital artist. Well, he's an artist, he's a painter first, but he had been making these fantastic images that a number of people have said have been a ray of light during lockdown. His name is Volker Hermes, and he's a German artist. And on the side, he'd been making for decades these digital interpretations of old master paintings. So he will take an image of an old master, and he does 19th century as well, and he will, only using elements from the painting itself, he won't add anything from outside, but he'll sort of take a cuff and turn it into a headdress, or he will, if they some of these really ridiculous 18th century powdered hairdos, he'll make them bigger and make them creep over their face. He does the same with powdered wigs where they sort of grow down, they were really, really fun. I spotted them, my husband in fact spotted them on Twitter, and so I tracked down who they were by, and I started putting stuff out on Instagram because it was making me laugh. And I was still on maternity leave at the time during the bulk of lockdown, and these were just sort of catching my eye when I was up late at night feeding the baby, and I think I'd been posting his stuff so much that eventually he got in touch with me and said, I don't suppose you know anyone at whichever museum. I see you've done some work with them. I've been desperate to get into their archives, but I've always been too shy to ask. And I thought, well, here's an opportunity. I do suppose you'd like to do a collaboration with Christie's for Classic Week by NHS. And he has done. So we've done this. You've spent the last 2 months back and forth every couple of days. He's absolutely divine, and chose lots from a couple of our sales.
The sculpture was
the sculpture is, and that I can tell you, I because when I sort of asked, again talking about the old guard and the new, I said, here's a great idea. This is what I'm thinking of doing. Everyone's been going crazy for his work on Instagram. All the museums love him. And old master said, oh well, I don't know, it's old age, we don't know that we want to treat paintings in that way. And I said, well, it seems to have been good enough for the Rijksmuseum, who let him loose on their entire collection, but our sculpture department. And I said, well, that's fine, if old masters aren't interested, I'll just do it with 19th century and sculpture. And sculpture said, we're in, count us in. And Volker said, oh, I'm not sure, I love sculpture, but they're very, very difficult to do. And then bam, out he comes with that fabulous flora, which he did right at the end and just snuck in. But it's been really, really fun. And one of the things we were saying about reaching new audiences, the only way to do, normally he'd have come to New York, we'd have had an event, we'd have had a panel discussion with him, we'd have had, his images are in large-scale prints opposite the paintings. It would have been great, but in doing it this way, we've put much more emphasis on it digitally, and we did this virtual viewing room, and we were all sort of a bit like, virtual viewing rooms, how many more do I want to scroll through? But it came out last week, and on Friday, and that is in the middle of 20th century mega hype. And so I thought, well, no one will see it first, but it'd be great because, by the time we get to Classic Week, there'll be a bit of traction. The marketing department sent us the stats, and they said in the first 24 hours, it had become the 6th most viewed viewing room at Christie's during, 20th century week. Oh, yeah, plus a dinosaur. Okay. And they said, but what's really interesting is people are spending double the amount of time scrolling through this one as they have been on the most visited, which was, I think, the Impressionist viewing room. And the great thing about that is, going back to what Robert was saying, is we didn't let him loose on the top lots because I couldn't quite get my bosses to go that far. But we did let him loose on paintings from part 1, or rather I did, and I just kept it quiet, and then I just did it, and it's fine. Nobody seems to have noticed yet. But we also did it with some of the much lower value lots, and that's when I'm looking at fashion elements, I quite often find that the lower value lots and the more sometimes the more provincial artists are the ones who pay much more attention to the fabrics and that kind of thing. And so it was great to see that he saw these paintings for those interesting details and gave them this wonderful makeover. got people to look at them who wouldn't have been looking even at old masters before, let alone at affordable old masters, affordable in inverted commas within our world. And so it's been really, really nice to see the results of that, and to see it sort of carrying on and seeing the domino effect as more and more people are looking. So there have been some, there have been some positives.
I think one of the I mean the idea of contemporary collaborations is of course something that almost everyone in older art, broadly speaking, has tried, sometimes with success, and mostly with a kind of astonishment of how really poorly they go together. And we've tried a couple of things, but it really requires an artist who has a real sense and love of old masters, as he seems to have.
Yes.
I mean, we did a collaboration a couple of years ago with Vera Luters, a contemporary photographer who loves old masters, and she photographed through his kind of pinhole camera two of our paintings. And I'm very, as I look back on it now, let's say maybe 2 years ago, both when we've sold both paintings, and one is one to a museum, one to a private collector, and they both acquired the photograph with it. I mean, they both because it did kind of give a new perspective on things. And in terms of what we're doing, and this is a little bit reflecting my own personal interest, we're not looking for collaborations with artists who really don't have the same sensitivity, or looking for non-representational art alike. But we've reached out to some of the figurative artists, traditional artists that I know. In our next digital catalog, there is a triptych. It's an absolutely fantastic thing, which you'll see, by a wonderful artist, Brendan Johnston, who really kind of loves old masters, and they're paintings that respond to it. So we, to the degree that one group is going to fall into the other, I don't know. The other artists, of course, we've shown Anthony Baus, who is kind of a fantastic lover of view paintings of ruins, and incorporates them into his own art. It's not something that we're really doing to increase the interest in old masters. It's really just to broaden the audience, generally speaking.
Exactly. And you can't force it. It has to be naturally done, I think.
Well, we're at about 6:45, and so I wanted to open it up. We do have a question, not the most, it's a little bit off topic, not the easiest of transitions, but going back to what we were speaking about a little earlier in terms of actual physical accessibility, from Peter. He writes, if you are selling, or as an institution buying, an object or painting, how do you handle condition questions when you can't stand in front of it and it might be a new gallery or client?
When we stand in front of it, or if the client can't see it, or if we
I believe that it's if you're either Adam as the client, or you or Robert as selling the picture, and you have a new client who I think they're inferring that you don't have like an established trust. How would you answer questions of condition? What can you kind of do to help translate what you would see on the canvas versus what you might see from, a high resolution image? And
well,
here, if you have a different translation of that question, please.
No, that's that is exactly what I've been doing this week, in fact. And we saw in the summer a huge uptick in new buyers in our area bidding online, and so that's exactly that sort of thing has been happening. I think the answer to that question is as candidly and honestly as possible. I think certainly my approach is to talk people through it very carefully, and explaining what is normal for a painting of this age, and what is normal for a painting in this medium, and just explaining what all of these, for people who are new to the area, looking at a condition report for old masters can be very scary, and just talking people through it basically is the key, and also offering to do that with a black light by video if that's helpful. But what we've now done is we have a sort of new process for all paintings coming in. They arrive at the dock, they go straight to the photo studio, they're shot in ultra HD, but they're also shot in UV now, as of sadly mostly too late for our sale, though we have a couple. But that's great because we can then, rather than having to do these shots holding a UV lantern light, lamp, that's the word I'm searching for, and taking photos with your iPhone, which it can work, but it can also be quite deceptive. So that's been one way that we've done it. So then you send the condition report, the ultra high definition image, and the UV image ahead of time, and then you talk the client through the painting from in front of it, and that I think is the best approach, and you're just as honest and clear as possible.
I was going to say, one of the things that I think these times will show is that there are kind of reliable people, reliable auction houses, reliable people at reliable auction houses. I mean, that you will go to, and this is going to be the big distinction, because without mentioning any names, there are people that I've known over the years at auction houses that everything's wonderful. I mean, it's all good. I mean, their job, as they saw it, was to sell the work of art no matter what, discounting any problems, and with the hope that the audience wouldn't really notice, or if they notice, it would be their children 50 years later when they try to sell it again. And that's not I don't think it's the case anymore. I think now, as Jonquil was saying, being candid about it, of course, this is how, I mean, myself as an art dealer, this is how I have acquired the trust of my collectors, and there's no point in doing it any other way. It's complicated enough, it's scary enough a field, whether it's by the condition or subject or attribution, that you really have to be, as I said, an educator, but also be brutally honest if necessary, but just also positively honest in terms of what the expectation should be. And I think it's all good. I think it's all good for the future, and also will give collectors, especially, and curators as well. And I have to say, there are some curators who are not so adept in the old master field, as some of the positions have contracted a little bit. You've got people that are in smaller museums, or maybe have more responsibility. One has to be able to inform them as best one can about the situation, the same as if it were someone who's completely new to the field.
I think, I'll try to put this very precisely, but I think that there is, and LeeAna, you sort of raised this issue in your question earlier that I didn't get around to answering about deaccessioning in museums, but I think the optics for acquiring works of art at institutions that are currently also going through layoffs, and that are shrinking their institutional size at the same time, it's a really difficult path to navigate. I'm very curious to see how peer institutions navigate this exact issue of sort of laying off their entire education department, and then acquiring works of art via purchase. I think will be really a hard thing to navigate. I don't know what that will look like, and it's a really complicated matter, especially as museums, I think, face a sort of renewed scrutiny from their public in terms of sort of being accountable to their audiences, and as ethical employers, it's going to be a really complicated space to wade through. And that being said, there are curators, I think, are sometimes in a tough position because they do have funds that are, you know, restricted and set aside for them to continue their mission and to continue to grow the collection and to continue, you know, to sort of present a vibrant and living museum collection. And so I don't have a great answer, but I think I'll just say that it's really delicate and frankly, it's awkward and it's complicated.
I think that was a great answer. I think that kind of candid nature of discussing these things that are by no means easy is what we need in order to make sure we're holding each other accountable. Lydia, do we have one more question?
Yes, we do. We have one more. Let's go. Here we go. For collectors with a modest price point, say under $5,000, where are the best values in the marketplace? Any specific areas you'd recommend? I mean, maybe you want to speak in kind of a niche.
Under five, I mean, clearly you can get wonderful drawings at that level, and that's why old master drawings have always been one of the great entry points for collectors. But at that level, there are things. I mean, I think one of the problems that we've found is that there is a stratification of the market, and dealers and auction houses have both been guilty of sort of focusing on the rarest and the most valuable works, because those are the things that they make the most money on, and they bring the most prestige and the like. And so, yeah, you can sell Stan for $31 million, but a wonderful little fossil of a, you know, of a fragment of a Triceratops skull will go for very little. So, and the same thing happens in the art world as well. So there's kind of a inordinate attention placed on attribution or placed on condition, and certain aspects such as, you know, if it's a fragment and the like. I mean, these things are so discounted by collectors, and they can be wonderful pictures that way. Certainly when I've started as a collector, these are the things that I bought. There are, of course, certain areas that are definitely still undervalued. I mean, British portraits, if they're not by Reynolds or Romney or the great names, or if it's a portrait of an elderly person, you know, these are kind of phenomenal bargains in a way, because there are certain criteria that still drive the market. And so it's really, you know, I think in terms of a collector at that level, it's really paying attention to what you respond to, because there are things that are accessible and purchasable, and enjoyable for the long term.
That's true. I think if you're willing to, you know, have a good scour of certainly of the auction houses, and you know, on the one hand, it can be a case of going to the more local auction houses to see what they have, but in fact, you can find. I mean, we've got plenty of paintings coming up. Well, in fact, they're up right now on the online sale, which is open until the 20th. And that sort of bidding platform works in more of a sort of eBay type platform, if you like. But we have a whole host of paintings in our Part 2 online sale that are offered with no reserve, and that means you can bid basically anything you like, and it's yours. And the idea of having a no reserve lot is that you encourage people to bid, and then hopefully it brings the price up higher. But it does mean that you can find really, you know, really quite lovely paintings for under $5,000. And it's, as Robert says, it might be that you can't get the autograph painting, but you might be able to get a copy of it, or you might be able to get something that was produced in an artist's workshop or in an artist's circle rather than by the artist himself. Or exactly, it might be something that's in a fragmentary state. But you can find a lot of paintings for under. You can find maybe even more than one for you get two, possibly more for under $5,000. So it's worth just looking and you know, speaking to dealers to see what they have, but definitely scouring the online sales. I think you'll find, you'd be surprised how much you can find and how much you would like from what's on offer at those price points. It's not all as expensive as you might think.
True.
Thank you for those very in-depth answers. And I hope that whoever asked that is now feeling excited about maybe buying an old master painting
I'm
or
excited for you.
or a fragment.
Excited for you.
Because why not? But anyway, we're going to wrap up because it is just 7 now. I just want to say thank you again to all of our panelists and for everyone for tuning in. This has been brought to you by October Art Week, which begins, actually the website will launch after this panel. So make sure to check out our participating galleries, including Robert Simon Fine Art online. And also, if you'd like to make appointments, there will be places on the website to do that with specific galleries, barring health and safety precautions. And I think that will end there. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.
Nice.
Good night.